We're live. All right, good evening, everybody. This is JL, the Anti-Guru, and welcome to the People's Podcast. Tonight I've got a special guest, a gentleman by the name of John Little. He is a speaker, a host, a panel moderator. Let me stop my music. And he has 15 years experience working with executives, managing directors, and unit leaders. Now, what he does, guys, is he helps human resources and people leaders provide value to executives, ERG teams by identifying coaching solutions to support an inclusive, result-oriented culture. John, appreciate you coming on and being with us tonight. I know you're a busy man.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Not a problem. Not a problem. One more thing we got to do, make sure that I am recording.
This meeting is being recorded.
So, John, tell us, first of all, how did you get into this line of work?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's interesting. I was in a role where I was doing leadership development for a company, and I was supporting a team that covered the East Coast of the U.S. So I'm based in South Florida in Fort Lauderdale, but the offices that I was working with were in Boston, New York City, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Charlotte, Raleigh, Charleston, Atlanta, Orlando, Tampa, and Fort Lauderdale. So a lot of offices in a lot of big cities, a lot of amazing cities as well, all up and down the East Coast. But when I would go into the corporate offices, I wouldn't recognize the cities that I was in, if you know what I mean. When I go into the office in DC and look around and don't see anybody that looks like me, when I go to the office in Atlanta and I go in and I don't see Atlanta, when I go into the offices in Philadelphia and Charlotte and in South and Central and North and West Florida, just not seeing the communities that those offices were located in. And so, I started to ask questions because I always like to approach things from the standpoint of curiosity, because I don't believe that it was malicious. I don't believe that it was intentional that those offices looked different than the communities that they were in. And it really was like a series of blind spots that occurred. And I knew that the company that I was working for wasn't unique with that. And so I just really had an interest in growing the diversity and also growing the people who have backgrounds similar to myself, or backgrounds that have been traditionally marginalized or underserved or underrepresented. I just recognized that it was a major opportunity and a space that I could be successful in.
So you kind of just created your own specialty, so to speak. Yeah.
A little bit. I mean, the diversity and inclusion world has been around since the 90s. It's been part of HR in some companies. It's part of kind of the corporate structure, or, in best cases, it reports to a CEO. But in a lot of companies, like diversity and inclusion, especially prior to 2020 and the murder of George Floyd, diversity and inclusion wasn't really a big part of what they did. They may have had committees that would work on things here and there, or they may have, little bits and pieces that would happen throughout the year. But I would say on a large scale, a lot of companies didn't have many resources dedicated to it, and especially not like specific resources that were dedicated to it. And if they did, some had strategies that were tied to it, but others may have really just kind of had things like lunch and learns and, book clubs and things like that, that while they're valuable, they weren't really impactful at an organizational level.
Right. So tell us share with us a defining moment or experience that it really inspired you to specialize. I know you mentioned George Floyd. Was there anything else that caused you to take this task on?
I don't know if I could identify a singular moment. Obviously, George Floyd, his murder was one of the big catalysts, in the summer of 2020, not just George Floyd, but also, Breonna Taylor, just everything that was happening during that time period. Like, I'll even take it back a few years before that. Like one thing that just still resonates with me was Trayvon Martin.
Right.
And me living in Florida, even though I don't live in Sanford, I live about 3 hours from where that happened. Trayvon Martin's mother went to the same church that I did in South Florida. And so I remember the Sunday after the verdict was read. And this was before I had my son, so I didn't have any children at the moment. But the pastor called all the men down to the altar, and just and all the fathers and the sons down to the altar. And I had some close friends who had sons that were growing up, and just the pastor just prayed this really powerful prayer. And I remember just getting like just really emotional in the moment, because it meant something to me to be like represented. It meant something to me to have a voice. And Trayvon Martin didn't have a voice, and it was snuffed out, and there was no way for him to be represented. And so like I always had some social conscience. I always had like some idea of like why certain things were important. But like that, when I look back and think back to that time, like that was one of those things, like don't just sit on the sidelines and think things in your mind. Don't just sit on the sidelines and not speak up and speak out. So that's just that's one of the moments, even though it wasn't directly tied to what I ended up doing work wise. It was tied, because like that was really kind of a push to like you can make a difference. And if you don't, saying it to myself, if I don't try to make a difference, then shame on me, because I have the ability to do so.
Well, excuse me, I got to get a little water. When you talk about these incidences, where people of color seem to be marginalized, even in the public and definitely most likely in the corporate world, you know, um, my thoughts are, I think, our family structure has changed so much that, we don't have traditional families like we used to. And I think that is impactful again about how people of color are viewed, or any minorities for that matter. Um, we don't have, like you mentioned, mentorship. We don't have fathers who are as actively involved as they could be or should be. And I think that does have a major role to play. But, getting back into the business end, I know you're a consultant. Um, what are some of the common challenges that you encounter when you're talking to executives about how to overcome some of these challenges with inclusion and diversity?
Yeah, I mean, it's a couple things. There are challenges that I've run into with like the ROI in business, the return on investment. You know, like how do you make certain things tangible? How do you make like diversity, equality, or diversity, equity, and inclusion? How do you make belonging tangible? How do you like translate that onto a spreadsheet or onto an earnings report or something like that? So, and it actually is pretty simple. When you look at the organizations that focus on inclusion as a culture, and they create that sense of belonging, then they see things like greater employee engagement. They see things like lower turnover. They see higher levels of retention. Like all of those things are business metrics that you can measure and you can correlate directly to the bottom line at a company. But if you don't have those that you're looking at through that lens, then executives sometimes have a hard time seeing, well, why do I want to invest this money in this program that may be a feel good? Or why do I want to invest this money into a program that only talks to a segment of my company? Like executives that don't get that DE&I is a fundamental business strategy, those are some of the more challenging conversations. But it's often just kind of turning it around and helping them connect the dots to inclusion, which leads to greater engagement, which then is going to give you better results. And then that's going to be reflected in your ROI. That's going to be reflected on your spreadsheets, on your earnings reports, on your annual reports.
I know like you say, it's hard to, for a long time, I think a lot of companies, and I've said this myself just in general, with even with social programs, uh,
This meeting is being recorded.
it's hard to well, how do I want to say it? It's hard to show the profit in people. Sometimes there's no profit in investing in people,
Right.
but it's the people that are the company. I think, like you say, a lot of executives, they get to a certain level and they enjoy a certain level of success, and they forget it was the people that propelled them that way. Because I know this was a while back. I was watching this series on Amazon Prime about men who built America. And
Yeah.
one guy, Henry Ford, um, one of the reasons why he was successful, one, he realized he wasn't the smartest man in the room and he had plenty of people around him, but he rewarded his workers because he realized that they were the one producing these automobiles. Because at the time, auto workers were getting paid $2.50 an hour. He
Hmm.
paid them $5 an hour. And because of that assembly line process, which I don't even think that was his original idea, but that made the car so much cheaper than making them handmade like they were made in the past.
Right.
I know his concept was I pay these people well, they're going to stay here and work here, but also they're going to be able to purchase the vehicles that they're building.
That's right.
Money keeps flowing around in a circle instead of just going in one end and coming out the other.
Yeah. And JL, it's so funny you say that because like in times like we are right now, there's talk of a recession, there's talk of financial challenges, companies are trying to figure out what to do. And companies that have a short-term vision and they just say, oh, times are tough, so we've got to lay off people. We've got to get rid of people. We've got to reduce our overhead through personnel. That's such the wrong decision because like from a cultural standpoint, like people are going to remember that. Like this is not 25 years ago where you make those decisions in a vacuum and nobody hears about it. Like if you make those decisions right now and you cut people and you let people go and you reduce your workforce, and sometimes like overcut, then people are going to remember that. They're going to tell that story to their friends. And when the economy turns around and you want to grow, you're not going to have access to prospective candidates, people who may be great assets to your organization, because the word is out about your company that when things get tough, the first thing they do is cut people, right? Companies that take the time now to invest in their people more, it's like, all right, so if the pie is smaller, okay, so let's not just like lop off pieces of the pie by getting rid of people. Let's invest in those people, get more out of them right now while they're still at the organization. And then when the economy turns around, because we know it's cyclical, we know it just goes from side to side, right? When the economy comes back, boom, you've got a much stronger company, you got a much stronger culture, and you have people who are going to be a lot more loyal to your company because you stood by them during tough times. But executives get scared. Like I get it. Like, they've got to report to people, but at the same time, you've got to, I count on executives to have a 3, 5, 7, 10-year vision, not a 3, 5, 7, 10-month vision.
Right, right. And it takes me right back to that series that I mentioned. All of these people, Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, Carnegie, during the Depression is when they made the majority of their money. Because, like you said, companies were pulling back, they were reducing, and they started buying out all of these other, like Rockefeller bought out all the refineries that decided they were struggling.
Right.
Came out on top and ended up being one of the richest men in America.
Mm-hmm.
That's even among regular folks like us. We start thinking like that. Okay, I need to cut expenses. I need to, conserve my money. Well, in a certain respect, you do.
Right.
Depending on, especially if you're an entrepreneur, um, there are other people who are shrinking. That means you can expand, just like
Exactly.
so,
Yeah.
So how do you leverage your expertise in these personality assessments that you have? Like you got DI, SC, MBTI. I don't know what these acronyms stand for,
Sure.
but these are things that you use for in your coaching when you're coaching.
Yeah. So I'm certified in DISC and MBTI, which is Myers-Briggs type indicator. And what those do is they help to give some insight into people's personalities, kind of what helps to make them tick, the things that are their motivators or their demotivators, things that could be blind spots, as well as things that you could use. I shouldn't say use, it's not used in a negative way, but things that you can use to try to get to know, like, how someone communicates best, how someone builds trust, how someone is going to react and respond during change and stress. So, like, having an insight into someone's personality and some of the things that are kind of important to them on an individual level, that helps me as a coach recognize how to help people be their best selves by, like, one, heightening their self-awareness. The more self-aware that someone is, then obviously that they're more aware of how the world can see and interpret them. They also can learn social awareness, so they can learn about other people and they can recognize, oh, I see what's going on with that person now. Let me be more curious. Let me ask about kind of what's going on with them. Ask them, how I can be of service to them. Ask them, like, how I can support them, instead of just, like, doing things through one lens. It's like going through the world with blinders on. If you only see things through your personality and your point of view, then you're missing opportunities with people all the time. So those assessments and that knowledge just helps me help people, see the world around them a little bit more and be able to navigate and engage with it at a higher level.
Yeah, so you're talking about, having empathy. I'm sure I know that's excuse me, I always get choked up at this point. It is a critical trait for leaders. Um, I think, I saw a meme one time, the best leaders are the ones, they're not in the front all the time. They're behind their people pushing.
Yep.
And so how do you teach and encourage leaders to develop that quality and that
I really try to emphasize for them how important it is to have individual relationships with people on their team. Because when you have a relationship with someone, it's a lot more easier to be empathetic. It's a lot easier for you as a leader to be able to kind of step into what's happening with somebody else and not just see it through your eyes, but see it through their eyes. And there's a difference between sympathy and empathy. Like, sympathy is like feeling for someone, like, I feel sorry for you, like, sorry that happened to you. Like, empathy is actually feeling with someone and, like, being able to put yourself into their shoes and say, hey, I see this is going on, like, what can I do to support you? How can I help you? Like, share with me what's going on, so that way, I can help you in this situation. Like that, from a leader, that's so, that's so valuable. Like you said, I've seen those memes as well. Like, you have some leaders who, like, lead from the front with their back turned to their team, and they just expect everyone to follow them. You got some that lead from the back, just like pushing their team. I really encourage leaders to lead from within. Be in the circle, be in the square with your people, because leadership is not a position. Leadership is influence. A lot of us have worked for managers who were posing as leaders, but, like, we could tell that they actually weren't leading at all. And I was just talking with some people on Facebook just the other day about some managers that we had back in the day. And one of them was reminding me, I'd forgotten about it, about a meeting that we were in. And this is like our most senior leader, in a conference room full of people who were, like, energetic and passionate and, like, really cared about their job. And then his message was, I've got 100 resumes on my desk that would take any one of your jobs if you don't want it anymore. Like, what? Like, that's not leadership. But
a lot of people, okay, well, go ahead on and do that, guy.
and
But
I shared, I've built a career off of those bad leadership lessons and
right.
those bad leaders that I had.
I'm thinking, when you have people from different social backgrounds or different racial constructs, you know, um, it seems sometimes difficult because, um, and we're just going to use black and white because that's the
Mhm.
most prevalent. You know, I know that sometimes, each racial group doesn't really have a clue how the other one lives.
Right.
But I find that, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I know for myself when I've had conversations with people, I say, well, there's some common things we all share. Like we all want to live a good life. We
Yep.
all love our children. We all want to be able to like retire with dignity, and so I'm sure those are some of the things that you use to tie things in for people to show
Yeah.
them we're more alike than we are different.
100%. We have so much more in common than we have different. Um, it's differences are more profitable than similarities. So there's a lot of factors at play that, and commercial, political, social. There are a lot of things that benefit from us not being together and from us not having focus on those commonalities, rather focus on our differences. Um, but the more that we can highlight those similarities, like you said, what do we all want at the end of the day? We want to go home to our families. We want to be someplace where we're safe. We want to be someplace where we feel love. We want to be able to make decisions and choices for what we want in our life. Like, I don't care what you look like. I don't care what your background is. I don't care who you love. I don't care what religion you are. Like, those are common things, right? We can focus on those if we choose to. But if all the noise that we're hearing is telling us that we're so different and we have to choose different things, that's just foolishness. Like, let's focus on the things that we can control, and let's focus on the things that are common to us and bring us together rather than the things that are pulling us apart.
Well, John, we were almost out of time, but I gotta ask, what one piece of advice would you give to aspiring leaders to help them reach their full potential and achieve the success that we all want?
Yeah. There's a number of leadership. There's a number of leadership things that people focus on, myself included, like tactics or principles, communication, trust, change leadership. Like, all of those things are great. But like, the number one thing that I always want to encourage leaders to do is make courageous choices for your people. Like, if you make courageous choices for your people, then you're going to see the benefits of that just so many times over, because your people are going to be so loyal to you if they see that you're courageously supporting and fighting for them. If they see you being courageous, then they're going to be courageous. One of my mentors always says the speed of the leader, and kind of the long version of that is the speed of the leader sets the pace. And so when you think about, like, as a leader, if you are setting the pace, if your speed is one of courage, if your speed is one of integrity, if your speed is one of, doing things with that lens of empathy and curiosity, like, just think about the path that you're setting forward for the people that you're leading. But courageously making courageous choices for your people is the number one thing that I would encourage leaders to do. And the sooner that you do it, especially if you're a young leader, the sooner you do it, then the easier it becomes, because you're going to have so much wind behind your sails that you'll be unstoppable.
That is a great piece of advice. Well, John, if people want to get in touch with you, how can they get in touch with you to either get a consultation or get you to come and supercharge their business? How can they do that?
Yeah, I appreciate that, JL. So a couple of ways. My website is thewinnersedgecoaching.com. So www.thewinnersedgecoaching.com. LinkedIn is always a great way. LinkedIn.com/in/Big John Little. Or you can email me directly if you'd like to, john@thewinnersedgecoaching.com. Either way, I'd love to hear from you.
All right, great, John. Well, listen, guys, I want you to go check John out. If you are a business owner, if you are a CEO, if you are a managing director, and you're wanting to propel your team and your business forward, he is definitely the man to talk to. And as always, remember my 3 R's: respect yourself, respect others, and always, always take full responsibility for your actions. Remember, I am always on every Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we will see you next week. Later. Talk to you later, John.
Thank you, Jay. I'll talk to you later.